In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade talk from around the NHL. Today, we're focusing on teams like the Maple Leafs, the Vancouver Canucks, the Boston Bruins, and the San Jose Sharks. We have some information from NHL player safety to discuss after last night's game between the Capitals and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Fines and suspensions look like they could be coming. We have a waiver claim as well, and some other news from around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, we do have news from the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, we discussed the Florida Panthers placing forward Rudolph Balcers on waivers. He was picked up today by their state rival, the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Balcers won't have too far to go, thankfully for him, to relocate. But he is going to be on the move. Well, actually for him, he's been on the move a lot in recent years. Started his career in Ottawa. After a few years, ended up going to San Jose, and then he spent a couple of years there. He was not qualified last year as being a restricted free agent, so he became a UFA and signed a one-year deal with the Florida Panthers. I think it's a one-year deal at $750. I know before the season started, it looked like he should be able to secure himself at probably in a top 9 role, but so far this year, he hasn't really been able to kind of lock that down. Obviously, they had to activate Aaron Ekblad, who's a huge part of their back end and defense. So unfortunately, they had to make some space, and they decided that he was the player that they were willing to take the chance with on NHL waivers. So now he goes to Tampa. I'm not really sure how much of a role he's going to get in Tampa. They do have a pretty deep forward group. He may just be the extra, 13th forward for a little while. But of course, since they claimed him, he will have to remain on the NHL roster. So we'll see how things go with him in the Lightning organization. Now, as I mentioned, speaking of the Lightning, they had quite the game with the Washington Capitals last night. Things got pretty heated. We saw a dirty hit and some other stuff happening, which kind of led to player safety making several decisions today. We don't have a firm decision yet, but Capitals forward and recently claimed off waivers from the Maple Leafs, Nicolas Aube-Kubel, has a hearing for a hit to the head against Lightning defenseman Cal Foote. And to me, that looks a really dirty, deliberate hit. I mean, obviously, I know Aube-Kubel doesn't really come across as a dirty player with, much in history in the way of these things. But when you watch the hit take place, like to me, he could have avoided it. And it looked deliberate to me. I hope it wasn't. I'm not sure how he'll defend himself to player safety. So we don't have a decision, at least as I record this. If a decision is announced by player safety before this makes it onto YouTube here over the next little bit, then I will note that down in the top pinned comment. So check there. If there's no update, then that means it hasn't been announced as of yet. But he's definitely going to be suspended. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if it's multiple games in this case. A couple other fines came out of last night's action as well, with the Lightning forward Pat Maroon and Capitals forward Garnet Hathaway both facing fines for unsportsmanlike conduct. Hathaway was fined $4,000. Maroon's fine was $2,700. I know the fines seem like a drop in the bucket for some of these guys considering what they make, but ultimately that's the way the CBA is written, that the fine's really not a whole lot of money, which in my opinion is why you don't usually see players caring too much about it and are willing to do things sometimes that it's not really that much of a punishment, in my opinion. Now, of course, the Leafs are honoring Boreas Salming tonight. It's basically Hall of Fame weekend. Monday, we'll see the actual induction ceremony for this year's class, which includes some former players like Daniel Offerson, Daniel and Henrik Sedin, and Roberto Luongo, and of course, a few others in the other categories. But they're also honoring Boreas Salming tonight. They actually had quite a ceremony last night as well at the Leaf game, where they had Daryl Sittler, Boreas Salming, Matt Sundin, and Boreas Salming, in case you don't know, I know based on the audience that watches typically this channel, I would think a lot of people will be quite familiar with him. We do have a very, experienced hockey crowd here. Of course, Salming in the 70s and 80s was big, and he's battling ALS, so he's going through a really, really tough time right now. Looks like it's certainly advanced a fair bit, and he certainly has his fair share of struggles he's dealing with. There was some concern he may not even be able to come over for this, but he has made it. And in light of honoring him this evening, the Maple Leafs, since they actually have a lot of Swedish players on their roster, of course, Salming was a trailblazer, from Sweden, really setting the stage for future European players to make the jump. But they're going with an all-Swedish starting lineup tonight. Of course, they're playing goaltender Erik Källgren again on both halves of a back-to-back, which is a little bit not real common, but the backup right now is 5th string Keith Petruzzelli. So I guess they're, a little reluctant to put Petruzzelli into NHL action. Of course, I guess what you'd call their 4th string Joseph Woll. He's also hurt. And Källgren being the 3rd string with, obviously Samsonov and Murray being 1-2, both out as well. Murray should be back soon. I think there's talk he could be activated, maybe play in the next game or so. I'm not real sure exactly, but that's looking like how things are going to go. So they're all Swedish starting lineup is Källgren. On the back end, you've got Sandin Liljegren. And up front, you've got Kalle Järnkrok, Pierre Engvall, and William Nylander. So it's kind of a cool way to honor all the Swedish players, but having them start on, one of the greatest Swedes of all time being honored in the building. So good on the Leafs for being a little bit creative and coming up with that to start tonight's game. Now, staying with people or players being honored, we also have a referee being honored this evening. Referee Kevin Pollock is refereeing his 1,500th game. So 1,500 games is quite a long career. Obviously, I know the refs don't typically get a lot of love and a lot of credit, but we do have to acknowledge as fans, and I know a lot of people are fans, played at some point in their life as well, might have kids playing. It's a tough job, and it's a thankless job, and typically they only get grief. They don't usually get a lot of credit. So to have a long career as a successful referee, certainly is very much deserving to be recognized. Tonight's game he's officiating will be between the Buffalo Sabres and the Boston Bruins. I'll show you a picture here. Both teams made a special jersey to mark the occasion with the 1,500 on the back, and it looks like the players signed it to him to commemorate the evening as a nice memory for him. So certainly want to acknowledge Kevin Pollock and the long thankless job that he's done in a long time. Like I said, a lot of refs don't get much credit, but it's not an easy job, and not a job that everybody is willing and able to do. The Devils have recalled goalie Nico Daws from the minors. Of course, their last game was against the Ottawa Senators on Thursday, and Vitek Vanecek, who's been holding down the fort with the absence of Mackenzie Blackwood, did leave that game, and I'm not sure that he ended up leaving injured. They didn't really say a whole lot. Lindy Ruff said he wasn't concerned, but then now we see the call up. And I honestly do wonder if we could see, them being in a situation here where they might have to rely on their 3rd and 4th string goaltenders now for a stretch of time. The Devils are obviously, having a phenomenal run right now. They did win that game in overtime against the Ottawa Senators. They almost lost it because the Sens got an early power play in OT, and it looked like they were going to be able to take the game, but their offensive players were getting tons of chances, but backup goalie who'd come in and really did an exceptional job. The Sens missed the net a few times, and then not long after, the Sens get a penalty, and the Devils, of course, right off the bat, capitalized quickly and kept the winning streak alive. So we'll see. This could be some adversity for them to face, and we'll see how they do. It could have a big impact, though, on their winning streak. Now, onto the trade talk of the video here. The number of teams we want to take a look at, starting with Boston. Now, we've talked about defenseman Mike Reilly recently. Of course, he's been on waivers a couple of times this season. Of course, had to go on waivers again just the other day to activate Charlie McAvoy. Of course, McAvoy, one of the greatest defensemen in the NHL, so no doubt they want to get him in the lineup as soon as possible. Reilly appeared to be the odd man out. Of course, he's a decent skating offensive defenseman. Does have, not the greatest defensively, but certainly a guy who can, a very serviceable guy who can at the very least be a 3rd pair guy, I think, on a decent amount of teams. But Reilly, apparently, from what we're seeing through the media here, is looking for a fresh start and would like to get traded from the Boston Bruins. Doesn't really want to spend the season in the minor leagues, and if he's not going to have any kind of a regular role with the Bruins, then he would like to be moved, which is certainly understandable. It doesn't sound like it's a huge demand, nothing hostile or anything of that nature, of course, but it's just like he would prefer an opportunity elsewhere at this point in time. So we'll have to see. He'd already been mentioned in the rumor mill being on waivers. I'm surprised we haven't seen maybe a little bit more interest in him. I know he's a player that other teams that need defense help might very well turn to here over the next few weeks, as we see a lot of teams with injuries piling up, like Columbus is a prime example. They are really beaten and battered up. I wonder with some room on LTIR if need be. If they may make some additions, we don't really know how they're going to handle things there. But certainly one team, for example, there's not been mentioned per se that they're definitely interested or anything like that, but they're a team that's in need, and he's an NHL defenseman, so it makes sense. But we might see a connection, but I would expect them to try to do what they can to find a fresh start for him here in the near future if possible. But they're certainly not going to just give him away. You know, the Bruins need to be smart here. They end up with an injury or two in the not too distant future. They might need him. So I don't think they're going to rush into things, and it's going to largely depend on the return. Now, Pierre LeBrun's talked recently about the Bo Horvat situation in Vancouver. Of course, Horvat is scoring at a crazy rate right now, having a phenomenal contract year. Of course, we see that a lot. Look at JT Miller last year, 99-point season and a contract year for the Canucks. And now look at things like he's had some egregious defensive lapses and, in my honest opinion, lack of effort in a few cases here. Horvat's certainly not that kind of player, not the case right now, but you do have to be careful. Like, I'm sure the Canucks are going to be a little bit skirmish here to do another long-term deal when they're not winning consistently and sitting in a playoff spot to be able to move forward here. So I don't know. I mean, LeBron's saying, though, on the Bo Horvat situation that there's tons of interest, that even teams not in the playoffs would be interested because they could get exclusive negotiating rights for an extended time for the rest of the season. So doesn't mean they're going to rush into a trade here anytime soon. I don't think they will. I think Rutherford and Alvin are going to give this time a little bit to try to figure it out and see where things are at. But, as we get into the later months of the season, I'd say even well ahead of the deadline, if things are not looking like they're going to be a playoff team and it's going to be a struggle at this point to be that, then I think they're seriously going to consider it. I mean, I honestly wonder if they have regrets on the Miller deal now, and they might lose Bo because of it. I don't think they want to. I think they'd like to keep him. But as time goes on here, his price tag is going to continue to rise if he keeps playing the way he is. LeBron also mentions the fact that they might be able to retain some salary where he's on an expiring deal. It's not like they'd be retaining money for very long to really entice buyers to kind of up their bids here and kind of create a little bit of a bidding war and maximize Horvat's value for a potential return. And really, to be honest, even if they traded Horvat, doesn't mean they couldn't be in the mix to re-sign him in the offseason if they really want to try to retain his services moving forward. Although usually when a player does get dealt like that, quite often you don't see it very often, especially with bigger names. So it doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen, but I think it's unlikely at this point. But it'll be interesting, though, because he's one of the players on the Canucks roster that would get them some pretty darn good value the way he's playing. A lot of teams, like not only contenders, but teams that are on the rise, that are coming out of rebuilds, like looking at like Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, like all those types of teams. Not to say that they're the teams specifically interested, but just examples of teams that are making good progress, coming out of rebuilds, and could add yet another piece to take them up to the next level for next year and beyond. So we'll see what happens, but he's bound to be lots of interest. There's also talk that because of where everything's at in Vancouver, that they're not expected to have any real serious contract talks for some time. Now, of course, also word again that the Toronto Maple Leafs, after a bit of a hot and cold season here, might be more seriously looking to make some changes. Now, in tonight's game, we're seeing some more lineup changes here for Sheldon Keefe as they get ready to take on the Vancouver Canucks as I record this video. By the time it makes it to YouTube, that game will definitely be already underway. Of course, they dropped a game against the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday, and today they're doing some things a little bit different. There's breaking up Matthews and Marner, and also TJ Brody is out tonight. The team has not disclosed an injury. Some are wondering if it is a healthy scratch, which to me, of all players to sit out, might seem a little bit of an odd choice, but at the same time, the coaches have their reasoning for making that choice. They're putting in Jordy Bent on the back end. He's certainly not an upgrade on Brody, in my opinion, but at the same time, sometimes coaches make decisions to kind of be more of sending a message, so to speak, to try to get things going. So at this point, they're putting Marner back with Tavares, who they in his JT's first season in Toronto played a lot with Marner. They can maybe reignite some of that old chemistry, and of course they've got Matthews playing with Nylander now, so we'll see how that goes. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see. But the Maple Leafs, I don't think they're going to be in any kind of a big rush here. There's been a lot of people thought maybe a defensive type trade might be what's in the works, but some also think that maybe some secondary scoring it might be more for them as well, maybe to find another winger. Obviously, they're top elite players. They're not having bad seasons, but I think it's fair to say that they could be doing a little bit more offensively, especially the Matthews-Marner combo just wasn't working this year. So they're not like they're doing atrocious or anything of that nature. The Leafs are still having a good season, but ultimately I think there's a lot more to find there, and maybe to mix up their forward group a little bit might be what's needed. I mean, some players that are kind of mentioned as being potential trade pieces would be including like Alex Kerfoot. Of course, he comes up a lot given what he makes for money and given the role he has. Pierre Engvald's another one who's potential there. And even if they do move a blue liner, a lot of people think Justin Hall's the main one, but I honestly do wonder just because they don't have a lot of right shot D. But of course, he's had his ups and downs. He's had his moments when he's done okay, but he's had a rough year as well, defensively speaking. I know his teammates love him. He's a well-liked guy, but at the end of the day, it's all about results, and if it's not happening, sometimes, you got to make a change. Of course, Hall's on an expiring deal with only $2 million left on it, so it's not a lot of money. It'd be easy to find teams to be able to take that, for the right deal. So we'll see what happens, but the Leafs definitely might be making a shakeup, but they're not going to rush into this. Dubas is going to take his time. If they run into a bit of a losing streak here, I would see a potential for trade. And another player to watch too, there's no guarantee that the Sharks are going to do this, but the San Jose Sharks, as we know, according to Elliot Friedman, are wide open for business. Not too many players on our roster would be considered untouchable, but one name that apparently is getting a lot of interest is Mario Ferraro on the back end. He's young, he's got some term, and he would have good value. Doesn't mean San Jose wants to trade him, just means teams are looking at the Sharks saying, okay, they're wide open for business. They're willing to do some wheeling and dealing here. They're not having a good year. We know they're willing to shake things up, and he's a player that would generate interest because of, like I said, what he brings to the table, his age, his contract. It just makes a lot of sense that there would be good value in him and good interest. So I know we've talked a lot about maybe the dream concept of them trading Erik Karlsson because he's such a big name and has a big contract. That would be very complicated. As much as teams would like Karlsson, I don't see the case of San Jose retaining money on that for several years. A guy like Ferraro, they wouldn't necessarily need to do that and might be able to get themselves some good pieces. But at the same time, he's not like, he's in that kind of in-between category where he's not like a brand new prospect. He's not like an older veteran. He's kind of in the middle. And obviously, those are sometimes when you see teams going through a bit of a rebuild, sometimes they're the best ones to move because they kind of have good value and they're kind of at a spot where it might not make sense to continue with them on that roster. But at the same time, moving a veteran might make more sense, but it's quite often tough. The contracts like Karlsson, Vlasic, etc. Good luck moving those. It's not going to be easy. So we'll see. No guarantee they do it, but lots of teams are kind of watching and having interest, and it may not materialize anything more than that. Only time will tell. So that's all your news for today. Let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.